Hello everyone, my name is Gabby and welcome back to another Dragon Ball Super review. This time reviewing episode 101. Jiren and Toppo send 5 members of the Pride Troopers, including Casserole, to deal with Goku, who ends up right next to Cauliflower and Kale. Seeing how Kale eliminated one of their own, the 5 Pride Troopers decide to attack all 3 of them, and seem to be doing a pretty good job until 17 and 18 show up to help. Once the heroes start getting the upper hand, Universe 11 decides to focus on taking out Cauliflower and Kale, the ones they know they can defeat. Cauliflower vows to protect her protege, and Kale's frustrations over being a burden cause her to transform once again. Except this time, her form looks a little different, and she can actually remain in control. The 2 Saiyan girls team up and successfully overpower the Pride Troopers, and Goku lets the girls go, knowing they can get stronger. And meanwhile, another fighter watches them from the shadows. So, what did I like about this episode? Well, first of all, this has kind of been a thing since these characters have been introduced, but I think this episode in particular really made me appreciate this, and that is essentially Cauliflower and Kale's relationship. The fact is, Cauliflower and Kale, no matter how much kind of development they get, at the end of the day, they are still kind of essentially really kind of built up to be sort of antagonists, like things that Goku or people in Universe 7 eventually have to fight and defeat in order for Universe 7 to be the last guy standing and to be the universe that survives. So honestly, they didn't really need to give any of these characters, any of these people who aren't from Universe 7, any kind of development or relationships at all. But like throughout this arc, they've really been kind of focusing on Cauliflower and Kale and how they have a very specific, unique relationship, how they have a very strong connection to each other. Kale really likes Cauliflower to the point that she basically goes berserk the moment that somebody else might steal her attention away, and Cauliflower's constant belief in Kale sort of seems to be part of the reason as to why Kale is able to get stronger in the first place. The fact that these characters do have relationships to one another, it does kind of make them feel like they're more than just a female Saiyan and a Broly clone. And it's not often that you really see these like actual kind of really sort of significant relationships between two side characters who don't even really need to have relationships in the first place. We do see elements of this in some other characters and, stuff like maybe like the Trio de Danger or like the Pride Troopers, how they all kind of care for one another. But here the relationship between the 2 Universe 6 Saiyan girls is sort of like their relationship is kind of what spurs them on. It's what spurs the plot forward. It's what makes them who they are. And it does make them far more interesting than just like plain antagonists. And because of this relationship, Kale actually sort of got a character arc within this tournament arc. Like, she starts off as one person, and then because of the event of the tournament, things happen to her, and those cause her to change, and she ends off as a different person. In this case, at least as far as I can tell, it was something like Kale started off as being kind of not very confident in her own power, but then she kind of just sort of displaced all that onto basically jealousy of other people as opposed to actually dealing with it, and then in this episode, basically because she had no other choice, she kind of had to deal with it and deal with her lack of self-confidence, and basically by kind of understanding that, she managed to learn how to not go completely crazy the moment she tried to use her power. I don't think it's a particularly strong character arc, and honestly it took me a lot of looking over it to try and really understand exactly what was supposed to happen in this episode, but at the very least I do appreciate that, yeah, there was something. A character did change because of these events, and also, really importantly, changed because of events that weren't necessarily related to Goku. It wasn't like Goku was going on there and like telling Kale how to use her power. It was like she kind of did this completely independently, just related to basically the Universe 6 adventures. It does make this world feel like it's kind of living and breathing, and no, Universe 7 and Goku is not necessarily the be-all end-all. Characters can go through character arcs without it necessarily having to do with the main character, and that doesn't really happen very often in Dragon Ball, so it's really fun to see. Also, if we're gonna sort of talk about like my checklist of fan servicey things that happened this episode that I really enjoyed, first of all, 17 and 18 working together as a kind of duo, that was always really fun to see, and their sort of attitude really kind of makes them stand out amongst everyone else. We also got to see Roshi actually do something worthwhile by using one of his attacks that he hasn't properly used since the first tournament arc in Dragon Ball, so that was like some really old school fan service, and then having Ten Shin Han step in to help him as well was really fun. As for what I didn't like about this episode, so what was the point of Kale having a kind of normal Super Saiyan form in the end? I know what the reason was supposed to be. It was sort of like a kind of a visual indication that Kale can actually use her own power without basically going berserk. The idea being that, if the Broly form kind of just looks like completely excessive, she has like a normal form that looks much more like, well, herself, and because of that she is much more like herself when she's using it. I understand that logic, but the problem with this episode was, by the end of the episode, Kale could actually use her Broly form, like, you know, big green hair and no pupils and all. She could use her Broly form without going berserk and without losing control of herself. So the problem is, by having her keep control of the Broly form, it basically makes that other form that they gave her kind of completely pointless in both a kind of practical way and a thematic way. I mean, in a practical way, if Kale has her Broly form and her Broly form is stronger and she can use it without losing control of herself, then why would she ever bother with using that normal Super Saiyan form anyway? And on a thematic level, this normal Super Saiyan form doesn't really symbolize that she's in any more control, because she is still in control of her big Broly form anyway, without any proper changes to its physical appearance. It kind of just felt like they were sort of undermining the plot of their own episode. I feel like they should have either just made Kale kind of ditch the Broly form completely and just have that normal Super Saiyan form, or just like have her go straight into her Broly form and be able to control it without having that weird intermediary thing. Like, don't do this half and half thing. It makes her kind of sort of arc feel a little bit incomplete, or it kind of feels like it's going backwards, because she's not completely shedding her Broly form, but at the same time she's not completely wholeheartedly embracing it in the events of this episode either, so it just kind of feels really incomplete. So as for next episode, well, one universe that we haven't really seen much of yet is Universe 2, and it seems like it's going to be Universe 2's time to attack with Magical Girls. I'm really excited about this. One thing I like perhaps just as much as Dragon Ball is Magical Girls, and having actual like Magical Girl references seemingly in the new arc of Dragon Ball, it's kind of just like it's my two favorite things meshed into one, and they might actually make like kind of meta sort of parody genre jokes about it, so that actually sounds like a lot of fun. So that was Dragon Ball Super episode 102. Well, I'll be honest, I'm not really so interested in some of the concepts in this episode. I do at least appreciate the stuff that it did. I still don't think Kale was implemented that well, or was even really that interesting to begin with, but I do at least appreciate that they were trying to do more with her. I mean, this episode was basically about her getting a character arc, getting her big dramatic moment, and her and Cauliflower using that big dramatic moment to go and defeat 4 Pride Troopers all by themselves. While I'm in the spirit of this week, I feel like I do need to mention it because it is kind of pretty monumental that this episode was basically all about 2 Super Saiyan girls going off and doing their own challenges, winning their own battles without any sort of help. If you were going to tell me that Dragon Ball Super featured an episode with stuff like that in it a few months ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. And even just having one of those characters not be particularly strong as a character and also be female Broly doesn't completely ruin my opinions of that and how cool that is. I guess in a way it's sort of similar to my opinions on the whole Frieza stuff. I don't think it was really that necessary, and I honestly feel like I prefer the story without it, but at the very least I do appreciate that Toei, looking at these plot points, looking at the stuff they need to do, realize that they need to actually do something interesting with it, something to make us feel like this is actually a big deal and it's actually kind of relevant and actually was a good idea in the first place, even if I don't necessarily agree. But according to the Grand Priest, it looks like the first part of the Tournament of Power is sort of over. There's like the first act, the kind of sort of getting all of the fodder universes out of the way, or most of the fodder fighters, so we can go and concentrate on like the real fights with the real strong guys that are actually kind of important. And that definitely does seem to be the case. I mean, a lot of the Universe 7 contestants haven't even really done anything very significant yet, so that's going to be really interesting. If I'm going to be completely honest, some parts of the Tournament of Power recently have seemed sometimes been kind of fun, but also been a little bit not that interesting, because a lot of the time it felt like nothing really big was being accomplished, or at least nothing big in terms of like the characters that we know about. But if those comments were anything to go by, it almost seems like that was only really the case because this was basically, all of this was just like the warm-up, and we're going to get to the real meat starting next episode. If that's true, that's cool. I'm really excited to see it. And there's plenty more stuff that I'm still expecting was going to happen at some point, and I definitely want to see it. So this is Gabby, signing out, and I'll see you all next week. Bye guys!